You get that ink out of a cereal box, old-timer. The voice was young, sharp, and marinated in the kind of arrogance that only comes from being the best and knowing it. Glenn Patterson didn't look up from his coffee. He was 81 years old, and the simple act of stirring 2 cubes of sugar into the dark liquid deserved more of his attention than the pair of mountains standing over his booth. He could feel their presence, the sheer physical density of them. They were big men carved from granite and confidence, wearing civilian clothes that did a poor job of hiding their occupation. The one who had spoken, a man with a hard jaw and eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward, planting his palms on the table. His knuckles were scarred. "I'm talking to you." The tattoo, he gestured with his chin toward Glenn's left forearm, which rested on the worn vinyl of the diner tabletop. There, on the sunspot and wrinkled skin, was a faded tattoo. It was a simple design, a stark black serpent swallowing its own tail. And inside the circle, it formed a single unadorned 5-point star. The lines were thick, the ink blurred by decades. It looked less like a proud emblem and more like a forgotten doodle. "What about it?" Glenn's voice was raspy, a low rumble that seemed to cost him effort. He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes pale blue and clouded with age, held a placid stillness that seemed to unnerve the young operator. The second man, quieter and with a thoughtful expression, nudged his partner. "Cutler, leave it alone." Cutler ignored him. "I'm just curious what it's supposed to be. Some kind of biker thing. You in a club?" He smirked. "What's it called? The Geriatric Guzzlers?" The diner, a cozy place called the Scrambled Egg, just a few miles from Fort Liberty, had been humming with the quiet breakfast rush. Now a pocket of silence was expanding from Glenn's booth. The waitress, Sarah, a woman in her 50s with a perpetually tired but kind face, froze with a coffee pot in her hand. Regulars who knew Glenn, the quiet old man who came in for coffee and toast every Tuesday and Thursday, shot nervous glances at the 2 imposing men. Glenn took a slow sip of his coffee. He placed the mug down with a steady hand. "It's just something from a long time ago." "A long time ago," Cutler mimicked, drawing the words out. "You serve." "What? Were you a cook quartermaster corps? Maybe pushing pencils in Saigon." The condescension was thick enough to be a physical force. He was testing him, prodding him, enjoying the perceived power dynamic. He and his partner were the tip of the spear, the most elite fighting force the world had ever known. This old man was just a relic, a piece of living history that had forgotten to crumble into dust. "Something like that," Glenn said, his eyes drifting toward the window as if the conversation was already a distant memory. This infuriated Cutler. He expected difference, or at least a flicker of fear. He was getting nothing but calm indifference. "You know, we don't like it when people pretend to be something they're not. It's called stolen valor. People who weren't there wearing things they didn't earn." He pointed a thick finger at the tattoo again. "That ink on your arm. I've never seen it. Not in any book. Not in any unit. And trust me, I know them all." The second operator, Reyes, finally spoke up, his voice low. "He's not claiming anything, man. We are on downtime. Just let him drink his coffee." "No." Cutler snapped, his focus locked on Glenn. "I want to know. I want to hear the war story that goes with your 50-cent tattoo. What's it mean, old man?" Glenn's gaze returned from the window and settled on Cutler's face. It wasn't a challenging look. It was a look of profound soul-deep weariness, as if he was seeing not just this arrogant young man but a long line of them stretching back through time. "It means something," Glenn said, his voice barely a whisper to the people it's supposed to. Cutler laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That's it? That's all you got?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "I think you're full of it. I think you spent your war peeling potatoes and you got that thing done in some back alley shop in Faggotville to impress girls." The disrespect was a palpable thing now. It hung in the air, thick and sour. Sarah, the waitress, placed the coffee pot down with a sharp clink. The cook in the back had stopped flipping pancakes. The quiet murmur of the diner had died completely. Everyone was watching. Cutler straightened up, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He'd won. He'd broken the old man's silence, even if he hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted. He turned to Reyes. "See, nothing, just another phony." As he spoke, he made his final critical mistake. He reached out and dismissively tapped his finger on Glenn's tattoo. The touch was light, almost casual, but for Glenn, it was like a lightning strike. The scent of stale coffee and bacon grease in the diner vanished, replaced in an instant by the thick metallic smell of blood and wet earth. The clatter of plates became the distant rhythmic whomp 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 of Huey Roders. He wasn't in a vinyl booth anymore. He was crouched in a humid triple canopy jungle. Rain dripping from the massive leaves around him. A young man's hand slick with mud was on his shoulder. A whispered voice in his ear. "Stay with me, Pat. Just stay with me." He remembered the flash of a makeshift needle. A shard of bamboo dipped in a mixture of gunpowder and ink. It was done in silence in a hidden camp deep in a country they weren't supposed to be in. A pact made between the 5 survivors of a mission that had officially never happened. The serpent eating its tail. The circle. The endlessness of their war. The star in the middle. Them. The 5 points of a lonely constellation in a blacked-out sky. It wasn't a decoration. It was a scar. It was a promise. He blinked and the jungle was gone. He was back in the diner. Cutler's finger was still on his arm. Glenn slowly pulled his arm back, his expression unchanged, but something inside him had shifted. The placid surface remained, but beneath it, an ancient tide had turned. While Cutler was pining, enjoying his performance for the silent diner, Sarah, the waitress, was already moving. She had seen enough. Glenn Patterson was more than a customer. He was a fixture, a quiet, gentle soul who always asked how her grandkids were doing, and left a tip that was far too generous for a single cup of coffee. Seeing him humiliated by these 2 titans of arrogance ignited a cold fury in her. She knew she couldn't confront them physically, but she wasn't helpless. She slipped into the small cluttered office behind the kitchen, closing the door softly. She pulled out her old flip phone, her fingers moving quickly over the worn keypad. She didn't call the police. What would they do? Ask the men to leave. This was a different kind of problem, one that required a different kind of solution. Her cousin Stacy worked as an administrative assistant at the JSOC command building on post. A long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Stacy answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "General Thorne's office. This is Senior Airman Miller." "Stacy, it's Sarah," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "Listen, I don't have a lot of time. There are 2 of your guys. I think they're here at the diner and they're harassing one of my regulars, an old man." "Sarah, I'm in the middle of something," Stacy started, sounding annoyed. "If they're causing trouble, you should call the MPs." "No, you don't understand," Sarah insisted, her voice dropping lower. "The old man's name is Glenn Patterson." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't recognize that name. Is he a retired general or something?" "I don't know what he is," Sarah said, frustration creeping into her voice, but they're mocking a tattoo on his arm. It's a snake in a circle eating its tail with a star in the middle. The silence on the other end of the line was now absolute. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. When Stacy's voice returned, it was completely different. The professional crispness was gone, replaced by a strained high-pitched tension. "Say that again. Describe the tattoo again." Sarah described it one more time. "And the name is Glenn Patterson?" Stacy asked, her voice tight. "Yes. Now, are you going to do something or not?" "Stay where you are. Don't let them leave," Stacy said. And the line went dead. Inside the sprawling, sterile headquarters of the Joint Special Operations Command, Senior Airman Stacy Miller felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The name and the symbol weren't in any official database she had access to. But she'd been working in this office for 3 years, and she had heard the whispers, the ghost stories told by old sergeants major about the men who came before the official units, the men who wrote the playbook in blood and shadow. Project Omega. General Marcus Thorne, the 4-star commander of all of America's elite special operations forces, was in the middle of a top-secret briefing with his component commanders. The room was soundproof, the air thick with acronyms and satellite imagery. Stacy knew the protocol. You do not interrupt the general during a SCF brief unless the building is on fire or World War II has started. She decided this was close enough. She walked to the heavy door, took a deep breath, and knocked. A colonel with an eagle on his collar opened at a crack. His face a mask of annoyance. "What is it, airman?" "I need to speak with the general." "It's urgent." "It can wait." He hissed. "Sir, with all due respect, it cannot." She pushed past him, her heart hammering against her ribs. All eyes in the room, the most dangerous and powerful military leaders in the country, turned to her. General Thorne looked up from the head of the table, his eyes like chips of flint. Airman, this had better be the end of the world. Stacy walked straight to him, her training kicking in. She leaned down and spoke in a low, clear voice that only he could hear. Sir, I apologize for the interruption. I just received a call from a source off post. A man named Glenn Patterson is being harassed at the Scrambled Egg Diner by 2 active duty operators from the unit. The general's expression didn't change. He was a man famous for his composure. They are questioning his service, sir, Stacy continued, her voice trembling slightly. Specifically, they're mocking his tattoo. She paused. A serpent in a circle with a star. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of composure didn't just crack. It vaporized. The color drained from General Thorne's face, replaced by a dark, thunderous rage that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the room. The other commanders flinched back, stunned. Thorne rose from his chair so quickly it screeched back and nearly toppled over. His voice when he spoke was not a shout. It was a low guttural command that sliced through the silence. Get my personal detail. Get my vehicles now. He looked at the other men at the table. This meeting is over. Back in the diner, the tension had reached its breaking point. Cutler, having received no satisfying reaction from Glenn, decided to escalate. His patience was gone, replaced by a mean-spirited need to see the old man break. All right, Grandpa. I think we've had enough of your stolen valor act, he said, his voice hard. He grabbed Glenn's upper arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Let's take a little walk outside. You and me, we can talk about respect. He was threatening to physically assault an 81-year-old man in a public diner. A collective gasp went through the room. Reyes grabbed his partner's shoulder. Cutler, no. What are you doing? But Cutler was beyond reason. He started to pull Glenn from the booth. It was then that the sound reached them. It wasn't the familiar wail of police sirens. It was a deeper, more ominous sound. The rumble of powerful engines moving at high speed, heads turned toward the windows. 3 black government-plated Chevrolet Suburbans had screamed into the parking lot, executing a perfect tactical formation around the diner's entrance. Before the vehicles had even come to a complete stop, doors flew open and men in sharp, crisp service dress uniforms emerged. They were not soldiers in combat gear. They were the command security detail. Serious-faced sergeants major and master sergeants who moved with an unnerving synchronized precision. They formed a perimeter, their eyes scanning everything, their presence turning a simple diner into a high-security zone. Cutler and Reyes froze. They recognized the vehicles. They recognized the lead NCO of the security detail. Their blood ran cold. The arrogance and bluster drained from Cutler's face, replaced by a sickly pale confusion. And the first icy tendrils of pure dread. The rear door of the lead Suburban opened. Outstepped General Marcus Thorne. The 4 silver stars on his collar glittered in the morning sun. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes, burning with a cold, controlled fire, were fixed on the diner's front door. He strode toward it, his detail falling in silently behind him. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as the general entered. The room was so quiet that the sound was like a gunshot. He filled the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the small space. He ignored the stunned operators. He ignored the gawking patrons. His gaze swept the room and found the man in the booth. He walked directly to Glenn Patterson. He stopped, his polished black shoes inches from the table. Cutler still had his hand on Glenn's arm. The general's eyes flicked down to that hand, and the look in them was so venomous that Cutler snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Then, General Thorne did something that no one in that diner could have ever predicted. He clicked his heels together, his back ramrod straight in the greasy spoon diner, surrounded by the smell of bacon and coffee. The highest-ranking special operator in the United States military snapped to the sharpest, most profound position of attention and rendered a perfect textbook salute to the frail, quiet old man in the booth. Time seemed to stop. After a long moment, the general lowered his hand. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. Glenn, it's been too long. Glenn looked up at him and a faint sad smile touched his lips. Marcus, you got old. General Thorne allowed himself a small, grim smile. He then turned his attention to the 2 operators who looked as if they were about to be physically ill. His eyes were arctic voids. You, he said to Cutler. You questioned this man. You questioned his tattoo. Cutler could only manage a choked, stammering sound. The general didn't wait for an answer. With slow, deliberate movements, he unbuttoned the cuff of his right sleeve. He rolled it up his forearm, past the wrist, past a thick, expensive watch. And there, on the skin of the four-star general, was the exact same tattoo, the serpent eating its own tail, the 5-point star. His was newer, the lines crisper, but it was an identical match to the faded ink on Glenn Patterson's arm. A wave of shock rippled through the diner. "Let me tell you who you were speaking to," the general said, his voice low and dangerous, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is Glenn Patterson. Before there was a SEAL Team 6. Before there was a Delta Force, there was a handful of men sent into the dark to do the impossible. They were called Project Omega. They were ghosts. Their missions were never recorded. Their names were never spoken. This man and 4 others were the founding members of the very tradition you think you represent." He took a step closer to Cutler and Reyes, his voice dropping even further. "In 1968, on a mission so classified it still blacked out in every file. His team was compromised deep inside Laos. They were hunted for 3 weeks by 3 entire battalions. Glenn Patterson carried a wounded teammate, me, when I was a young lieutenant, on his back for the last 2 days through swamps and enemy patrols to get to the extraction point. Of the 5 men who wore this mark, only 2 are alive today. You are looking at both of them." He let that sink in. The weight of his words settled over the room, crushing Cutler and Reyes beneath them. The patrons stared, their mouths agape, looking at the quiet old man in the booth with a completely new understanding. They were in the presence of a legend they never knew existed. The general turned back to his operators. The rebuke when it came was not loud. It was a quiet surgical evisceration. "You wear the uniform of the quiet professional. That is our creed. Today you forgot the quiet part. You forgot the professional part. You forgot that every single thing you have, every piece of gear you use, every tactic you employ was paid for in blood by men like him. You forgot to respect your elders. You forgot everything." He looked them up and down with utter contempt. "My office 050 tomorrow. Be prepared to turn in your credentials." He had just ended their careers in the elite tiers. As the 2 young men stood there broken and humiliated, Glenn Patterson finally spoke. He pushed himself slowly out of the booth, standing on unsteady legs. He looked not at the general, but at the pale, shattered faces of Cutler and Reyes. His voice was soft, devoid of anger or triumph. "The tattoo doesn't make the man," he said, his pale blue eyes holding theirs. "The man makes the tattoo mean something. All this," he gestured vaguely at the general, "the uniforms, the operators, it comes and goes. But your character, son, that's the only thing you truly own. Try not to lose it." With that, he looked at his old friend. "Buy me a coffee, Marcus. It's been a while." As General Thorne put a steadying hand on Glenn's shoulder, a final fleeting image bloomed in Glenn's mind, not of the jungle, but of a quiet moment after. A makeshift aid station, a much younger Marcus Thorne, his arm bandaged, wincing as Glenn himself, his hand steady, applied the last touches to the fresh tattoo on the lieutenant's arm with that same bamboo needle. He remembered his own words from that day a half-century ago. "It's a promise to remember the ones who aren't here and to never ever quit. Now you're one of us for life." The fallout from the incident at the Scrambled Egg was swift and decisive. General Thorne didn't just discipline Cutler and Reyes. He saw a symptom of a larger disease. A generation of warriors who were so focused on the present that they had forgotten their past. Within a month, he instituted a new mandatory block of instruction for every single special operations candidate. It was called Legacy, and it was a deep dive into the history and lineage of their silent profession. The classes weren't taught by active duty instructors, but by a rotating roster of vetted veterans from Vietnam, Grenada, and Panama, men like Glenn Patterson, who were flown in to speak directly to the young candidates to share their stories and impart the lessons that could only be learned through time and sacrifice. Cutler and Reyes were not dishonorably discharged. General Thorne believed that would be too easy.